I'm Helmut Licht. Welcome to my fourth video on my Vertical Zodiac. Way back in the 50s, when I was still in Germany, I had decided to become an interpreter in English and in French. So I enrolled in this language school in Munich. My first program was English, and toward the end of the program, every student had to do a real live interpretation. The school would set this up for us. My job was to interpret the conversation between an English engineer and a German engineer. This German company had bought this modern, huge weaving machine. It was shipped to Germany, it was set up, it was all ready to go, but now the English engineer had to explain to the German engineer all about the machine. And I was the interpreter. I knew English and I knew German. However, I had no idea what a gasket was. And I had no idea what an adapter was, or a gear wheel, or a fitting. Hundreds of other expressions. I had no idea what they were, let alone their German equivalent. So what I had to do two things. I had to learn a new concept, which is the weaving machine. I had to learn how it works, sort of, how things fit together. And then I had to learn the vocabulary. It's the same with the Vertical Zodiac. I and you have to learn two things. The Vertical Zodiac, the concept, which I've explained to you in the last 3 videos, some more in this video, but then also a new vocabulary. And I will show you in this video how to create a new vocabulary. You can do this yourself. You can follow my footsteps. You might come up with some good ideas on your own. Let me know. And then once you have the vocabulary, then you can interpret the Vertical Zodiac chart. So let's jump right into it. I have come up with 4 methods of creating a vocabulary. The environmental method, the synonym method, the zoom method, and the imperial method. And I will explain these to you now one by one. If you have watched my previous 3 videos, you know by now that declinations have 4 distinct phases. North increasing, north decreasing, south increasing, and south decreasing. Let's name the blue area sky and the brown area earth. Here again we have our 4 phases. Now let's rename them to up, down, down, and up. This cycle could begin or end anywhere along the way. It could end or begin at letter A, B, C, D, or somewhere in between. Let's look at Mother Nature and see if we can find a cycle which begins at letter C. I have adjusted the size of the blue and the brown area for reasons that will become obvious. A seed sinks down into the ground. After a while it sprouts, and the sprout grows up toward the open air. A tree begins to grow up. A fruit containing seeds falls down to the ground, and the cycle repeats. Let's look at this cycle again and assign some words to the various phases. Here we have the planting phase. Then we have the sprouting phase. Then the growth phase. And then the separation phase. I have just created a very basic vocabulary. It is small right now, but it will increase, and I will show you how. Let's look at this cycle again and bring it into the human environment. A woman is impregnated. There follows a gestation period. A child is born and grows up into an adult. The adult leaves the family environment. He impregnates a woman, if it is a male, and if the adult is a female, she becomes impregnated. So each time we bring the cycle into another environment, we will add new words, thereby increasing our vocabulary. We can add as many environments as we wish, because each time we add a new environment, we will get new meanings and expressions, which will increase our vocabulary. Let's take another environment. Let's take a person's work career environment. You work for a company and you are laid off. You're separated from the workforce, you're unemployed, and you're looking for a job. You go to an employment agency and you get leads. You go to interviews, and finally you land a job. And you begin your new job and start growing with the company. And once again, we have added new words. We have added A, working at a job, B, discharged, quit, C, employment agency, job potentials, and D, job interviews. All these environments have something in common. Look at the work and career environment. If you don't go to an employment agency and get leads, you don't get a job interview, and you don't get hired, and there'll be no new job. In the human environment, if there's no impregnation, there'll be no gestation, and there'll be no new birth. In the plant kingdom, if there's no planting, there'll be no sprouting, and there'll be nothing new growing. So in a way, they're all similar. Now let's consider this cycle from the spiritual point of view. A soul individualizes. It enters into a physical organism, such as a mineral, plant, animal, human being, or higher. It gains experiences in that environment and then leaves its temporary environment as a more evolved soul. So back to our vocabulary, as you just saw in the spiritual column, phase B, we begin with separation of the soul, the individualization and its descent into the physical environment, temporary environment or home, and then the gaining of experiences in this temporary environment, the process of perfection, and then the departure from the temporary physical environment back to its non-physical state of existence as a richer and more evolved soul. I have to give you a few more quick examples because every example will illustrate a different aspect of the phases of the declination cycles. So please bear with me. You live alone, but you would like to have somebody else in your life. So you join a singles club. You meet someone and you two start dating. You get married and you have a new married life together. You don't feel 100% well, so you join a health club. You work out and develop your muscles and good eating habits. A new you emerges and you feel great. War is raging and a desire for peace starts to manifest. The leaders of the warring factions meet. They work out a peace plan and implement it. Peace begins to reign. Summarizing our first method, we can create new vocabulary by relating the various declination phases to different environments. Next is the synonym method. If you look at B and work career, we have all these different meanings for separation. We have quit, laid off, discharged, terminated, unemployed. In other words, we have synonyms. And synonyms is a wonderful way to increase the vocabulary. Let me show you. Here are synonyms and related words of the word separation. I've highlighted a few of them, and I will just go through them quickly and let you form your own association. Breakup, division, divorce, dismemberment, distribution, segregation, discrimination, disagreement, dissidence, diversity, hiatus, exodus, withdrawal, even flight, desertion, separator, fence, border. And here is the zoom method. Here is a map of part of Baltimore. And I'm interested right here in this area called Clifton Park. So I would like to find out more what this is. So what I do is I zoom in. I'm seeing more detail already. I see blocks, I see neighborhoods. And right here is Clifton Park. I see buildings. Let me zoom in some more. And I see little pathways, little green areas that might be a golf course. I believe it is. Here are the greens and the sand traps. And the more I zoom in, the more detail I see. I see trees now. And over here I see buildings. The same way that we were able to zoom in a map, and the more we zoomed in, the more detail we found and saw. We can also zoom in on certain areas here. For instance, phase A in the human environment, birth and growth. The more we zoom in on this particular area, the more detail we will discover, as you see next. We have now subdivided birth and growth into baby, toddler, pre-teenager, teenager, young adult, adult, and senior. And each of these categories can be again subdivided. Let's look at phase B in the human environment, the separation phase. And we have kindergarten, separation from the home. The child sleeps in its own room suddenly. That's separation from the parent at night. The child spends the night at a friend's house. That's separation. Student lives in the dorm. Separation from the home. The graduate marries, leaves the family to form his or her own. That's separation. Marriage problems. That's separation. Then the adult may lose or quit a job. That's separation. And he or she may dissolve a business partnership. That's separation. He or she may belong to a sports team like a bowling league, tennis club, and decides to quit that. That's separation. And then, hopefully not, the adult may commit a crime and found guilty and goes to jail. That separates him or her from society. And then there's always the ultimate separation when he or she passes away. The empirical method, simply put, is when you relate something that happens in the sky to something that happens on Earth, and then set up a correspondence. In other words, if every time Mars goes to the first house, the native feels a boost of energy, then after a while you can say, well, Mars going to the first house means increased physical energy. If a lot of people who have Mars in the 10th house become famous athletes, then you could say a native with Mars in the 10th house is likely to become a famous athlete. And that's something that you do as you analyze charts and analyze declinations and then draw correspondences. We can now give some keywords to our phases. A new or existing situation. B, separation, either voluntary or forced. C, new environment to facilitate change. D, effort exerted to effect change. The resulting new situation. From the tree of infinite ideas, one idea separates and enters into the mind of Henry Ford. It is the idea of an automobile, which he calls the quadricycle. Henry Ford develops the idea and finds financial backing, which allows him to build a plant where he can manufacture the automobile. The car is being built as it goes through the many manufacturing stages until it is ready to be shown to the public. And the rest is history as the concept, the idea of the automobile develops, grows, becomes more intricate, and gets perfected. I'm not interested in timeline accuracy here, but only to show you the evolutionary character of the various phases. I feel that new or better ideas always originate in the northern maximum or southern maximum declination area that you see here in purple. If they originate in the EZ area, then they are radically different. Here's an example of non-EZ better ideas. You just wash your hands and you're looking for a way to dry them. So here is the good old paper towel roll. And here's the next step up, a paper dispenser. And then the next step, touch-sensitive paper dispensers. But then here's an EZ idea as to how you dry your hands. Let's go back to Henry Ford. He had an idea of an automobile, but if the idea just stays there, it's just an idea. Something else has to happen once you have the idea. There has to be a desire to implement the idea, to bring it down to earth, so to speak. Henry Ford needed to get people interested in the project, people who had money and were willing to invest it and risk it. Once he had the money, he needed to find people who could build the shop and install the tools necessary. Then he had to find people who literally put it all together. The shop workers, the engineers, the designers, the managers, and so on. Well, what good is a car if nobody knows about it, and therefore nobody will buy it? Public awareness had to be created for the new idea. Once the public became aware of the car, orders came in, sales were made, and the idea simply took off in leaps and bounds. As mentioned earlier, developments, improvements, innovations can come either as a normal extension of development within the normal framework of improvement, or they can come from the EZ area. the extra zodiacal area. And here is one more example illustrating the difference. Here we have a 1920 model car, and someone said, wow, it gets pretty hot in here in the summer. Why do we do it? So we can take off the top. And voila, we have the convertible. A few years later, someone said, instead of taking off the top, which is very tedious, why don't we just put air conditioning into the car? I mean, we have it in the house, why not put it into the car? And here it is. Then someone else who kept getting stuck in the snow said it would be so nice if all four wheels would have the independent power. And the four-wheel drive was invented. Then someone else watched construction workers labor as they shoveled dirt and put it into a wheelbarrow and then moved it to a different location, and had a much, much better and easier idea. And the farmers found a way to make their lives easier also. And the military started doing major modifications of the idea of the car. And then somebody started thinking outside the box and had an idea that came from the EZ territory, the extra zodiacal territory. And the person said, why not have a car that drives on land and also floats on the water? Voila. And then another person had an easy idea. Why not have a car that drives on land and flies in the air? Voila. So far, we have only discussed one type of cycle. The one that, let's say, begins right here, goes straight up, comes back down, goes straight down, and goes straight up again, and ends up pretty much where you start. It could start over here, but it always pretty much ends up at the same spot where it started. Like the apple doesn't fall far from the stem. You remember that saying. In other words, our apple produces an apple tree that produces an apple that produces an apple tree, and it just swings back and forth. It never changes. I call this a closed cycle or an intrinsic cycle. There is another cycle which I would like to explain to you now. Let's take our intrinsic cycle, which begins at A and ends at A. In other words, it always ends up where it starts. And now take the lower part of it and bend it to the right. And we end up with a waveform, which does not return to its point of origin, but ends up in a different place. We still have our four declination phases, but I get a definite feeling of motion to the right. We get this type of waveform, for instance, in sound recordings. Let me show you what I mean. I brought up my recording program, which I use to record all my music. I'm going to put it into record mode right here and hit middle C on the piano. And here's middle C. Right now it's just a glob on the screen, but if I zero in on it, you'll notice that it actually turns, let me go over here a little bit, it turns into a waveform. And the more you magnify it, here you see the waveform. It goes up and down, not evenly, but it's a waveform. Here you see the waveform of an electrocardiogram. And this waveform shows the stock market from 1920 to 1940 with the infamous stock market crash in 1929. Up and down and back up. I'm only showing you all these different waveforms because every environment or every situation that can be displayed in a waveform will supply us with a host of new meanings to be used when we interpret our vertical zodiac. Let's take our stock market chart here. We invest some money at this point here, and then the stock market goes up and we gain. Our value increases. And then suddenly the stock market goes down and we lose whatever we have invested, or at least we lose the gain. And then it goes below the value where we invested and it's a real loss. But then it goes back up and we recuperate our loss. Please remember that even though we are looking at a stock market chart here, a stock market wave, if you wish, we are still discussing the vertical zodiac and its phases. North increasing, north decreasing, south increasing, and south decreasing. We could now create our own meanings for these stock market cycles and bring those meanings into our ever-growing dictionary. For instance, from the financial perspective, the increase would be good, and the decrease would be bad. And the further decrease would be very bad. Let's change this chart into a weight chart where somebody keeps track of their weight. Here, the gain would be bad, as you know, and then the weight loss would be good. However, if the weight goes below normal, then the weight loss is bad. If it swings back up, then it would be good again. I'm pointing this out to you because I don't want you to just assign good to north increasing and bad to north decreasing. You have to consider declinations and their phases with respect to the chart that you're working on and its environment. For instance, the meanings of this weight chart could change totally if the situation changes. If an actor has to gain weight for his part, then the weight gain would be good and the weight loss would be bad. However, if the actor had to play a part where he had to look emaciated, then the weight loss would be good and the weight gain would be bad. So you see, it changes with the environment. Let's take our declination wave and perform a little morphing. Here is our zero declination line. Let's call the blue area sky and the brown area earth. Let's call the brown elevation mountains. And the blue dip, after we fill it with water, ocean. Here is a train going into a tunnel. Let's make the sky more realistic. Here is a cruise ship floating in the ocean. And here's a truck on the road. Next, we'll put an airplane into the sky and a mine shaft into the ground. Let's add a city on the faraway shore. And let's make the ocean much deeper. And now we see a deep sea mining rig. Let's put a cruise ship back in and also our city. This picture deserves closer scrutiny because it's a tremendous source of new information and vocabulary with respect to our vertical zodiac. Remember, the red line is our zero declination line, which means no northern declination, no southern declination. Also remember that this is north declination and this is southern declination. Note that all normal human activity, such as transportation, by train, by boat, by truck, car, occurs very close to zero declination. When we get into aeronautics, then the northern declination increases. And when we get into mining, for instance, then we're getting into a higher southern declination. Space exploration would fall into the extreme northern declination even the northern EZ area. And deep sea exploration would fall into the extreme southern declination and possibly even the southern EZ area. Let's have a look at this picture and isolate the airplane. And you might say, well, very simple. Anything to do with an airplane would have to be a very high northern declination. But it's not that simple. Consider the various aspects of the airline industry, the pilots, and then you have the service people, the stewardess. On the ground, you have the ticket counters, and you also have the people handling the luggage, the flight controllers, the airplane manufacturer. Last not least, the service industry that makes sure that all the planes are in perfect running condition. So to work for the airline industry, the native would not necessarily have to have the career planet at a high northern declination. However, if the native were considering becoming a pilot, having the career planet at a high northern declination would certainly be an advantage. If a person's career planet does have a high northern declination, then the airline industry is not the only option available. He or she could be in the construction business, building high rises, or clean windows of high rises, just to give you an example. Whether a planet has a high northern declination, medium northern, none at all, a medium southern declination, or high southern declination, or even EZ, sooner or later, it will cause you to gravitate into an environment which allows the planet to express itself. Let's talk about careers for a moment with respect to the vertical zodiac. Let me ask you a question. What do these environments have in common? Well, all these environments are ground-based, very close to zero declination. With respect to the vertical zodiac, the same as people working on a train, in a city, in small, low-level buildings, on boats, in traffic, all kinds of traffic. And what do these two environments have in common? Well, they are both high altitude, which means higher declination. With respect to the vertical zodiac, let's talk about environment. Let's take a random date, let's say June 21st, 1972, Baltimore, at 8:30 p.m. A child was born. At the same time, a puppy was born in the neighborhood. At the same time, also, a mouse was born. All these three, the baby, the puppy, and the mouse, would have an identical birth chart. But their environment is totally different. Therefore, you could not interpret the puppy's chart the way you would interpret the baby's chart or the mouse's chart. It's the same with declinations. Before you interpret declinations, you have to absolutely consider the environment of the owner of the chart, and then limit your vocabulary to that particular environment, which I've shown you in this video. This concludes my fourth video on the vertical zodiac. In my next video, I will work with an actual chart, maybe two, to show you how all these concepts are applied in interpreting a chart. Have a great day. Stay well. If you're not well, get well.